Thank you all for coming from near and far, family, friends, colleagues, and guests. I'd like to have a few thank yous that I owe. First and foremost is to Ramaz, to Mr. Schiowitz, and to the school for supporting me for all the years I've been here as this work has been developed, also in the publishing process, and also for hosting this event. I'd also like to thank everybody for coming this morning and for your support all the years that I've been here. I'd like to thank the publisher of OU Press, who published the book, and Dad, I'm making that, for coming today. I'd like to thank my parents, Mom and Dad, and Shira and Tamar, and Yigal and Rachel for representing our family, and all of the teachers who are here, my colleagues who have taught me and challenged me through this process. And last but not least, my students, without whom this wouldn't have been possible, who have taught me much, and I guess it wouldn't be necessary either without you, but we have a couple representing the others. I also want to just flash back, and I guess I owe a thank you to Madrikh La-Moreh, who was one of the senior Talmud teachers when I started at Ramaz, and when I thought of this idea, I was, I think, my second year teaching, and I tried to sell it to him, that this is what we should do. We should prepare materials, organize them for other teachers, and I basically convinced him that it's a good idea, and we worked together for a year, working on the Masechet Sanhedrin, and he not only gave me ideas and approaches of how to teach, he also had amassed a lot of resources of his own times teaching it before, and that became the first stage in this process, but it's been evolving since then. Also want to thank Yigal, who sits with me at the end of every semester or so, and we go through every single sugya and find, what was strong, what was weak, what sources did Yigal find I didn't find, and a lot of his ideas were incorporated into the books. So as I mentioned, this is a long process that took over 10 years, and it was in many different stages. I was fortunate that Ramaz teaches a 4-year cycle, so each of the Masechot that I prepared, I was able to teach 2 or 3 times, and each time I sort of rewrote it and revised it again and again, and eventually I just feel like I can't do that anymore, so I decided to publish it. At the outset, it looked a little bit different. Firstly, I included worksheets, like handouts that you would actually use in the presentation of the sources, as well as the actual outlines of sources. But eventually it became hard to manage, and also I felt that the worksheets were sort of specific and particular to each teacher, and it wouldn't be so useful to share that, but the more raw material, the research, would be more shabbat l'chol nefesh and useful to other teachers. I also started with a commitment to tzur hadaf, that everyone should learn from a page of the Sefer. So I had a folder for every single unit with a photocopy of every single source that I would teach, along with my outline. So each unit was like a folder, like whatever it was, like 20, 30 pages. And then, a lot of times it goes on from one page to the next page, so it becomes a lot of pages. And that became very hard to manage and inconvenient, especially because each time I would reteach the same material, everything was updated in new editions. So the first time I did it, I actually scanned copies of every daf of the Gemara that we taught, from a regular Gemara. And, they were a little crooked or whatever they were. And then, the next time, there was the Ozal Hadar came out, so how do you use the regular Gemara? Okay, the Ozal Hadar. And then the next time, well, the entire Shas is available online in PDF. So, and then other Sfarim also were updated. So what was the purpose in giving people the edition that you don't want to use? So I actually owe a big debt of gratitude to Joe Sambolin, who works in the copy room downstairs, because he would help me collate every unit, and we made the cover page a colored page, and then he would bind it together. It was like the dread of the summer, but he made it possible, and I still have a lot of those files, but I switched, I guess, updated to digital text of taken from CD-ROMs and other resources with just the text basically in Microsoft Word. And this also had revisions because as the word went on, there were more and more Sfarim on the Bar Ilan. So originally I had to skip And then like the Chidushei Haran became available, and then Minchas Chinuch, and I tried to add in whatever I had, so now it's all in regular text. And the purpose for including all the text, besides making the book 4 times longer, because each book is about 200 pages, I'd say about 50 pages I wrote, and the other 150 pages are all the text of all the sources, primarily to make it easier for teachers. If you read this book, look at this source, look at that source, then you have to do all the work still. So I was trying to make it easier. By the way, if anyone wants the book in Word, you're welcome to take that. I can send that to you. But I struggled with the title of the book, and I thought that Shulchan Aruch would be perfect, because my purpose is really to prepare everything, make it easy for teachers to use, but of course that was taken. So I moved to Madrikh La-Moreh, which, again, it's a guide for teachers, and I hope that it's a resource, but it also leaves a lot open for teachers in terms of making your own choices of what to teach, what to include from my materials, what to exclude from my materials, and what to add in from your own, aside from the way that a teacher presents the material. I don't think this is a closed book in the sense that there's more to debate and consider, including, excluding, adapting. I can't wait till the next person writes a better version of the same concept, and it will be my honor to be the first, as far as I know, even if it's not the last or the best, but I do hope that it's useful for now. My overall purpose is that, if you think about it, if we were just here to teach the objective knowledge of the Gemara, Dayenu, it would be enough of a machayev to demand us that we prepare, that we research, we know that Gemara is complex, that issues that are presented in one section of the Gemara might be embellished in other places, might be qualified by Mefarshim on the daf in another place. In a Sefer, Machshava might have a whole take on a Gemara, which is useful. So in order to present the Talmud accurately and thoroughly, we need all that knowledge accessible to us. And unlike when you're learning in yeshiva, and I remember, there are Sfarim where they collect all the Mefarshim, Rishonim, Achronim, on a sugya, and a lot of people don't want to use it because they feel if they can find their own research on their own, why should they just read it from someone else to do the research for them? We kind of value the work of Yigiyah of Torah. But I think when you're a teacher, you're really not rewarded for your work as much as you are for the results of what's taught and the quality of what we teach. And therefore, you really want to get as much material as possible to make the best choices about what to teach and how to teach. But really, teaching Talmud and Torah in general is much more than just a subject matter. We would be naive and misguided if we thought in those simple terms. Torah represents, when it's being taught, Judaism as a whole. And the way that a sugya is presented and is absorbed by the person studying it is also the picture that they have of Judaism and the Torah in general. And if the sugya is not compelling or seems wrong, then Judaism seems wrong. And therefore the way that we teach a sugya, not that there can't be questions, but the way that we teach a sugya defines how the student perceives the entire religion. And just as one example, which is very sort of simple and obvious, but also it happens, topics like Tzaddik V'Ralo, why the righteous suffer. A lot of times the Gemara will have a comment about that topic, and just make one line. And to say, well, we'll study this one line because this is the Masechet we're learning, and when we get to the next Masechet, we'll see the bigger picture or how other Amoraim understood it. But the student might not be there for that next Masechet. So it's really your obligation if you're opening the door to the topic and presenting how the Torah says it. You can't just say, well, this is the view of this line, and I don't know anything else. But it's really our obligation to show the bigger picture. Otherwise, we've really misrepresented what Judaism believes. So it's for that reason that it becomes even more of an obligation for the teacher to consider the impression that every sugya will leave psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, theologically, and otherwise, God, I feel like God's going to be telling us, I sent you to improve the world by teaching this, and you've actually done the opposite. The main purpose is not only the research and the collection of all the research, but also the decision-making process of how we choose which Gemara, which Mefarshim. And I'm actually have to thank Rabbi Goldman's, who suggested to me a few years ago when he saw what I was working on, who suggested that I add footnotes and explain how I made each choice. And I did that, and I think that really changed the quality of the whole work. And if I had another couple of years to work on it, I would probably work more on the footnotes than on the top part of the book. But I try to explain how I made the choices, but typically it's based on A, what's the most obvious problems and questions that need to be addressed, and also how do we make the sugya relevant and meaningful to the people studying it. And I'd like to share just a couple of examples with you. So one, Masechet Sanhedrin, we have the topic of Ben Sora Moreh, the rebellious son. The Torah says that if a rebellious son is put to death. So this is not really a topic that we particularly teach. It could be ignored, and the only reason why we learn that chapter is because the second half of the chapter has a lot of really interesting sugyot that are unrelated completely, and I think it's one of the most popular prakim to teach in high schools in general, about above Machteret, so when it comes, murder and self-defense, Rodef. But on the top of every page, it has the three words, Ben Sora Moreh. So I think probably the first time I taught it, I just didn't mention it. Just teach the rest of the paragraph. It's not really important to address. But then I found a way to present it, and now when I spend a day or two speaking about Ben Sora Moreh and say, we're learning the second half of the paragraph called Ben Sora Moreh. You might know what it is. You might have read the psukim. Tell the students what it is, and choose a couple of sources that I think really paint a relevant message about Ben Sora Moreh. In particular, the Mishnah says he's Nidan al Shem Sofa. He's judged based on what he's going to do in the future, his future crime. Because we know, based on what he's demonstrated so far, we know 100% that it's only going to get worse. And therefore, Mutal, it's better that he should die now, Zakai, rather than actually living out his inevitable potential. So the most important thing that I think the Gemara says that Ben Sora Moreh is Lo Hayav Lo Yiyah. That it never happened, it's a historical statement, and Lo Yiyah, it can never happen, because all the particulars of Ben Sora Moreh are simply impossible to ever happen. So why was it written in the Torah? The Gemara says, Drosh v'kabel schar. You should get rewarded for learning about Ben Sora Moreh. So the first time you read that Gemara, you think, more Talmud Torah, because in case there weren't enough psukim in the Chumash and enough da'atim in the Gemara, he ran out. So now you have an opportunity to get more reward for Talmud Torah. But the truth is that a lot of Mefarshim already say this, that it doesn't mean just the reward of learning Torah, but you'll learn a truthful, meaningful message from Ben Sora Moreh. And then I collected a few Rishonim that present their own message. Overindulgence. Then Rav Moshe Feinstein has a really fascinating tshuva where he quotes this halacha Ben Sora Moreh and paskin the halacha in Neighbors Moshe based on Ben Sora Moreh, and he says that it's forbidden. I know some students in yeshiva are smoking marijuana. He says so it's really usher against the Torah to smoke marijuana. Where does it say that in the Torah? He says Ben Sora Moreh halacha l'maisa. So it's really a great application, I think, of Ben Sora Moreh. And there are times where I have my own interpretations that I include in the books, and here's one where I actually thought that the Drosh v'kabel schar is really the opposite of what you think. And that is that if Ben Sora Moreh is a person who we know definitively has no hope for a better future and is better off dead, and you put together the fact that it can never happen, what it really means is that there's no one who's really hopeless. And really perhaps the Drosh v'kabel schar is you get enriched by the knowledge that there's no one who's really without any hope. There are ways to make the sugyos applicable and relevant. One other example from Sanhedrin is that the Gemara discusses the concept of kamle b'derabah minei, which means that if a person does a crime that deserves a punishment, two punishments, he only gets the more severe punishment. So when you make that statement, it seems logical, right? Then when you learn the examples and you find out that, let's say someone throws a rock at someone else's window, so you don't have to pay back the damages because, listen, I did a violation of Shabbos for carrying a rock, so now I'm exempt from the lesser punishment of paying you back for the window. And not only that, even if I'm not getting the punishment of Shabbos because it was without warning, so I still am exempted from the lesser punishment. So it becomes a little bit, difficult. Why am I teaching Talmud Teachers? For the simple reason that the Gemara raises it in the middle of the sugya of Madrikh La-Moreh. Madrikh I want to teach. So you come across Talmud Teachers, which is an important halakhic principle, but not necessarily relevant, but it's challenging. You can't avoid the moral question of how can you say that you don't owe the person for his window if you just because you violated Shabbos for shogeg at the same time. So here, and I think I was guilty of this the first time I taught this, kind of like went through it, but you can't mention the principle of Talmud Teachers without teaching the principle, which appears in Bava Metzia, which is that this only means that the beis din won't enforce a punishment, but you actually owe the money. You actually owe the money. B'dei Shemayim. B'dei Shemayim doesn't mean that it's extra credit. It means that you owe the money. Beis din only enforces one punishment for every crime, but you owe the money halachically. So if you teach Talmud Teachers and leave that out, because they'll get to that when it comes to Bava Metzia. Right now, I'm learning Sanhedrin. You really distorted the Torah and left an impression that's really very different than the actual halacha. In Maseches Brachos, one of the most fundamental principles in the first parak is smichas geula l'tefillah, that we say Shema right before Shemona Esrei. And when the Gemara introduces it, kol hasomek geula l'tefillah shall arvis mevi geula l'olam. If you fulfill smichas geula l'tefillah, you bring the redemption to the world. So, okay, I understand that smichas geula l'tefillah is important. Why is such an exaggeration? This one thing brings the entire redemption. So here, first of all, obviously, that question is going to come up, and we shouldn't talk about it. So don't just say, well, whatever. Don't question the Gemara. We shouldn't raise that question. And here the Ran gives an answer that I think is relatively well known. It's Rabbeinu Yonah, it's in the Sugya of Brachos, and he says, well, because this represents a very big principle of Judaism. The reason why the Gemara exaggerates and says Nevi Geula Olam is because this is the kind of person. This really defines the kind of person who will bring the redemption. And why is that? And he offers two interpretations. The second interpretation, which used to be the only one that I taught, is as follows. He says that Geula represents the fact that God is involved in our lives. He is our Redeemer. He saved us in Mitzrayim. And that has to come before Tefillah, because Tefillah is the demonstration of Geula. If you believe that God's involved in your life, you're going to adopt him and you're going to ask him for your needs, because you believe that he's the one who, I tell my students, if you, you don't ask me for a new iPad, because I'm not the one who has the iPad. But God's the one who has them. If you believe that God's in control, you ask the person who's in control. There's a reason why you ask your parents and your teacher. And if you realize that God's involved in your lives, and then you will be a person who will bring the redemption, because that's what it's all about, recognizing God's involvement in the world. So that's how I used to teach it. There's another interpretation of Rabbeinu Yonah that I used to skip, and that is that he says that, well, God saved us from slavery, Geula. We used to be slaves. Now that we're saved, so now we're God's slaves. So, Avadim Hashem. So the way that we demonstrate that we're God's slaves is that we daven, because davening is called avoda, and avoda is like worship and work, like an eved. So we're showing that we believe that we're God's slaves by davening right after the Geula. So I always thought one interpretation was enough, and the second one, which I said first, is really much more appealing. And then one day I had this epiphany that really they're both very important interpretations, because I was actually motivated a lot about my time. I wrote an essay about the lack of feeling of commandedness that we feel, and everything has to be, it's good for you, it's inspiring. God has the money, and daven to God, but we're God's servants. We have to do what He says, and that's also part of smichas geula tefillah. So I kind of teach both interpretations and try to highlight the values of each. And this is what I kind of write in the footnotes, and I wish I would expand more on this one in particular, but that, you know, they're both meaningful, and, you know, how you present it makes it meaningful, and how you think about it. Masechtas Brachot, the first time I taught it, has an entire daf about Kavod HaBriot, which I didn't teach the first time. Primarily, I didn't notice that it was there. It's not in the same paragraph of the rest of our curriculum. But then one day I noticed the sugya of Kavod HaBriot, which is a full daf, which deals with when we override halacha for the purpose of maintaining human dignity. And, you know, it's also like, how can you skip that and spend just another day about Zman Kriyashma if you have this sugya, which is so rich in terms of the halachic value of human dignity and the fact that we override the halacha to maintain Kavod HaBrios. And sometimes we override Kavod HaBrios to the Torah, how important the Torah is. Although some of the examples, there's also in the footnote, some of the examples might be a little hairy, so you might want to be careful about which examples you choose. You know, like for example, Rambam's opinion is unique. He thinks that if you see someone wearing shatnez, he's supposed to take his clothes off in the middle of the street. So, you know, there are other Rishonim that disagree with that. That might be a little hard to swallow. There's also about 2 daf of Agadah in Brachos, which I also, you know, it's another thing is Agadah. You know, finding the Agadatas that we tend to not teach enough, but instead of the second or third time I taught Brachos, I said, I'm going to look through the Masechet to find things I never noticed. There's like 2 daf in a row. All the Agadatas about Sadi Furalo, and these very honest conversations in the Gemara that I think are very compelling about Vav Zion. And lastly, I want to mention Masechet Sukkah, I guess the 3rd volume, and Masechet Sukkah has this wonderful topic. I was looking for like my highlight in Masechet Sukkah of Madrikh La-Moreh, which is that you're not supposed to do mitzvahs in a way that presents as arrogant. And it comes in the context of eating a snack in the sukkah, which you're not really obligated to do. You're not obligated to eat a snack, only a meal. So if you eat a snack, it's a Madrikh La-Moreh. And so, according to some of Rishonim, the Gemara actually has this machlokes hanayim about whether we should be worried about it in this particular case. And then, you know, to find the sources that extend Madrikh La-Moreh to other cases, it's spoken about eating in the rain in the sukkah. And it's always consistent. In these particular cases, the Shulchan Aruch recommends that it is a good thing to snack in the sukkah if you can, but it's not a good thing to eat in the rain. And you try to find why it is or why it isn't. But then how Madrikh La-Moreh applies in other cases also. Wearing your tzitzis out. Rabbi Yosef has a tshuva about wearing your tzitzis out, which is, you know, all about Madrikh La-Moreh, and he actually is opposed to wearing your tzitzis out. He thinks it's wrong as Madrikh La-Moreh, and he quotes like all these Sephardic Kabbalistic poskim who are against it. And they said, well, our dear brothers who are Ashkenaz, you know, what can we do in your yeshivos? You do it, so it's not so bad for you, but it's really the wrong thing to do. But, you know, these kind of conversations make the sugyos much more meaningful and compelling. And you know, the purpose of this book is to help teachers find what they might not find otherwise, and motivate us to find more. So, thank you for your attention and for coming today.